In the spring of 1934, in rural Lincolnshire, England, a domestic tragedy would become one of the most notorious poisoning cases of the era. The name Ethel Major would be whispered about in pubs and printed in the newspapers, a woman accused of killing her own husband. Over the decades, she has been dubbed the corned beef killer, but the subject remains controversial. Was this a cold, calculated murder? Or was a potentially innocent woman put to death? Ethel Lily Brown was born in 1891 in Lincolnshire, the daughter of a gamekeeper employed on the estate of Sir Henry Hawley. She grew up alongside three brothers, and like many girls of her class at the time, she left school at 14 to begin work. In her case, as a dressmaker. Her life in rural England at the turn of the century was modest, but Ethel's early years were overshadowed by a secret that would follow her into adulthood. In her early 20s, she gave birth to a daughter, Oriel, around 1914. To avoid the considerable scandal of a child born out of wedlock, her parents decided to raise Oriel as though she were their own. Publicly, the child was presented as Ethel's younger sister, but the truth was known by a few and rumours were whispered about by many. The identity of the girl's father was never revealed, not to neighbours, not to friends, and not even to the man Ethel would later marry. That man was Ethel Major, a soldier returning from the Great War in 1918. Arthur was hailed locally as something of a hero, and on June the 1st of that year, he and Ethel married. A year later, their son Lawrence was born, and the couple settled for a time with Ethel's parents. This kind of arrangement wasn't unusual, and all seemed peaceful for a time. Arthur took work where he could, and Ethel managed the household. But in 1929, the family relocated to the small Lincolnshire village of Kirkby-on-Bain, where Arthur secured a steady job as a lorry driver at the local gravel pit. This move, while promising on the surface, would in fact mark the beginning of a dark chapter in their lives. The long-buried secret about Oriel resurfaced through village gossip, eventually reaching Arthur, and he confronted his wife, demanding to know if the rumours were true. When she confirmed them, but still refused to name the father, Arthur's attitude toward her seemed to harden. Resentment grew quickly. Arthur sought solace in drink and, according to some accounts, began to physically assault Ethel. Their once stable marriage unravelled into mutual bitterness. By the early 1930s, their home life was overwhelmed by constant friction, accusations of infidelity, and deep mistrust. Some sources claim that Ethel herself would sometimes hint at her despair and its potential solution, muttering that a man like that is not fit to live. While her indiscretions had happened in the past and before she was married, it would soon come to light that Arthur's were not only much more recent, but also closer to home. He had began an affair with a neighbour, Rose Kettleborough, and Ethel, after discovering love letters between them, responded with fury. She launched what can only be described as a campaign of revenge against her husband. She tried to have him evicted from their council house, reported him to the police for driving the lorry drunk, and made sure everyone in the village knew of his unfaithfulness. Arthur, for his part, retaliated in his own cruel way. In a public notice printed in the Horncastle News, he declared that he would no longer be responsible for his wife's debts. It was a humiliating and very deliberate act meant to shame her. When Ethel confronted him about the affair, demanding what he intended to do about Rose, Arthur coldly told her, "Nothing. You'd better do something about it yourself." By 1934, the Major's marriage was little more than open warfare. Ethel now in her mid-40s, had developed a reputation as a bad-tempered woman who was disliked in the community, and Arthur had become known for womanizing, drinking, and for the contempt he had for his wife. The relationship had become so toxic that Ethel often refused to sleep in the same house as him, walking more than a mile each night to sleep at her parents' home instead. But what happened next would bring their years of conflict to a deadly conclusion, as Arthur's words daring his wife to do something about it herself seemingly came back to haunt him. The chain of events that would ultimately seal Ethel Major's fate began in late May of 1934. At work one spring day, Arthur Major sat down to lunch. Despite his, let's say, less than perfect marriage, he still relied on his wife to make him a packed lunch each morning. Most days it would consist of a simple corned beef sandwich, and today was no different. It's a simple but hearty foodstuff, often found in rations, but on this particular occasion it didn't taste right. Arthur stated it tasted off and threw the sandwiches away. He even joked with a colleague that perhaps his wife was trying to poison him. A few weeks later, he was served another meal of corned beef at home and quickly fell violently ill. Convulsions racked his body and a doctor was called. At first, his symptoms were difficult to interpret. The attending physician suspected epilepsy or some kind of neurological disorder. After some initial treatment, he appeared to pull through, though stomach pains and trembling continued to trouble him. But his reprieve was short-lived. Over the next few days, his condition worsened dramatically, and on May the 25th, 1934, Arthur Major died. Medical knowledge in the early 20th century was still limited, and sudden deaths were often attributed to epilepsy or convulsions when no other obvious explanation was found. Arthur's passing at first seemed destined to be one such case. His funeral was scheduled for the very next day, May 26. While the community mourned Arthur's sudden passing, another curious event occurred that threw the tragedy into an entirely different light. A neighbor's dog, who had eaten scraps of corned beef believed to have come from the Major's household, also suddenly collapsed and died. The symptoms, painful convulsions, spasms, and rapid death, were eerily similar to Arthur's own final hours. Suspicion began to stir, and shortly after, an anonymous letter arrived at the local police station. It was signed only "Fair Play," and the writer alleged that Ethel Major had poisoned both her husband and the dog by feeding them the tainted corned beef. Authorities immediately halted Arthur's funeral. His body was ordered to undergo a post-mortem examination, and the dog's body was also exhumed for testing. What began as the tragic passing of a man was now rapidly transforming into a full-fledged criminal investigation. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Rosh Lynch, one of the leading pathologists of his time. His analysis revealed strychnine in Arthur's body, a toxic, fast-acting poison often used for pest control. The same substance was found in the remains of the dog. With these findings, Arthur's death was no longer an unexplained seizure, but an undeniable case of poisoning. Police quickly turned their attention to access. Who could have obtained strychnine and who had reason to use it? The answers always seemed to circle back to Ethel. Her father, a gamekeeper, kept strychnine in a locked box for legitimate use on the estate. During the investigation, police discovered that the key to that box had gone missing. That very key was later found in Ethel's handbag. Even more damning, when police first questioned her, they had not yet disclosed that strychnine had been identified in Arthur's system, but Ethel reportedly asked them, "How did you know my husband died from strychnine poisoning?" Once suspicion fell squarely on her, Ethel was arrested and subjected to further questioning. Investigators combed through the Major's troubled marriage for motive. Witnesses came forward with damaging testimony, and one neighbour, Elsie Roberts, swore she had seen Ethel feeding the neighbour's dog herself, even though Ethel was known to dislike the animal. Though no one could place Ethel's hand directly adding strychnine to Arthur's food, the circumstantial evidence built up. She had access to the poison. The key was found in her possession. Her husband and the dog both died with strychnine in their systems, and she had a clear motive after his infidelities and toxic marriage. Public attention quickly latched onto the case. Newspapers across the country covered it with fascination, dubbing her the corned beef killer. The idea of a wife secretly lacing her husband's meals with poison shocked readers and fueled gossip. Some women's groups even rallied to her defense, arguing that the case against her was circumstantial and calling for clemency. But the police believed they had their culprit, and by summer's end, Ethel Major stood charged with the murder of her husband. Her trial opened at Nottingham Assizes on November 19, 1934. By then, her case was a national sensation. Crowds packed the courtroom, eager to see the woman who stood accused of poisoning her husband with strychnine-laced corned beef. The prosecution painted a picture of a bitter, vengeful wife driven to murder by jealousy and humiliation. They presented the couple's marriage as one long, festering wound. Ethel's resentment, they argued, had boiled over after she discovered love letters between Arthur and their neighbour, Rose Kettleborough. The prosecutor told the jury that Ethel had been waging a campaign of revenge, spreading gossip about her husband, reporting him to the police for drunken driving, and attempting to have him thrown out of their council house. When those measures failed, the prosecution claimed she decided to take matters into her own hands. She poisoned him in his food, ladies and gentlemen, and then she poisoned the neighbour's dog to silence its barking, or perhaps as practice. The prosecution's case was circumstantial but compelling. Ethel's defence team, led by barrister Norman Burkett, one of the most respected advocates of his day, faced an uphill battle. They argued that the case was entirely circumstantial. No one had seen Ethel place strychnine into Arthur's food, and opportunity did not equal guilt. Burkett said that Arthur himself had joked, "The wife is trying to poison me," before his death, implying that this was the sort of humour common in a failing marriage, not an actual confession of danger. The defence also raised doubts about the chain of custody of the key, suggesting it could have been planted. And they argued that the anonymous letter signed "Fair Play" might have been written by someone with their own grudge against Ethel, eager to see her life ruined. But despite Burkett's strong attempt at a defence, the jury seemed unmoved. And on November the 23rd, 1934, after just 3 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict: guilty. Ethel Major stood in the dock as the judge pronounced the sentence required by law: death by hanging. Her execution was scheduled for December the 19th, 1934, at Hull Prison. The verdict shocked some and satisfied others. In the weeks that followed, petitions for clemency began to circulate. Supporters argued that the case against Ethel was based solely on circumstantial evidence and that no direct proof linked her to the administration of strychnine. Letters were sent to the Home Secretary, Sir John Gilmore, pleading for mercy. But the Home Office reviewed the case and found no grounds to interfere. Public sympathy was not universal, though, and many believed she was guilty and had earned her fate. On the morning of December the 19th, 1934, Ethel Major was led from her cell at Hull Prison to the execution chamber. The official executioner was Thomas Pierpoint, assisted by his nephew, Albert Pierpoint, who would go on to become the most famous hangman in Britain. At precisely 8 a.m, the trapdoor fell and Ethel Major, aged 45, was pronounced dead within minutes. Outside the prison, a small crowd gathered in the cold. Another chapter of Britain's history of capital punishment had closed. The case of Ethel Major, remembered as the corned beef killer, still stands out as one of Britain's most notorious poisonings, combining all the factors of a classic true crime case: a bitter marriage, infidelity, small-town gossip, and sudden death by a hidden poison. But what do you think about the case? Was justice served, or could there have been another side to the story? Could Ethel have been framed? And if so, why and by whom? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Right then, take care, and I'll see you next time with another story that will make you say, well, I never.